Hey everyone, this time we will be working on one of the Konica rangefinder cameras, the Konica SII, which was introduced in 1961. I recently acquired this camera from a lot that I purchased last month. It comes with a selenium light meter, Copal SVE shutter, and the Haxanon 47mm f2 lens. Upon inspecting the camera, I found that the overall condition is not bad, but there is some oxidation on the body, which may cause the paint to chip. The shutter seems to work, but I have to press the shutter button twice to cock the shutter again. The lenses are dirty as usual, and the viewfinder has some dust on it, but the patch is bright and yellow, which is good. The selenium meter is in working condition, I think. So let's check deeper into the shutter and other parts. You may need this rubber lens removal tool to remove the lens unit. Usually, the Copal shutter is between the front and rear lens unit. Loosen the screws and remove the first ring unit. Then, remove another set of screws holding the ring that contains a resistive strip inside. This one only needs to be turned about half to unlock the. This ring should not be fully tightened, which should be noted. This is the shutter speed cam, which sets the shutter speed according to the pattern. Everything seems to be in its place. This one is escapement, which adjusts the shutter speed. Most of the time, this one causes the inaccurate shutter speed due to dirt and rust. This one is a self-timer, and the rest of the parts are shutter cocking mechanisms. Let's inspect the components on the bottom side. These parts are in excellent condition. To remove the top cover, we need to take out the screw located below the winder nut. Additionally, the cocking lever needs to be removed as well. Put every small part in this type of container. Otherwise, I may not remember which screws go where. These two parts need to be rag-glued later on. The viewfinder has some dust on the glasses, but the coating on the viewfinder patch is pretty good. The parallax correction is working too. It is released to see that the light meter is working, but there are some kind of things on the needle. To remove the shutter and focusing unit from the camera body, I need to remove the leatherette. It's important not to damage it, as finding an exact match for this pattern is difficult. There seems to be some messy residue, likely dried glue, possibly from a previous attempt to re-glue the leatherette. I had to scratch out most of the dried glue because the screws attached to the shutter and focusing unit to the body were completely covered with them. Before further disassembly, let's remove the back cover. Removing the back cover is an easy step. Even your grandmom can do that. After that, I removed the film counter or exposure counter. It only needs to remove these 3 screws for the film counter unit. I had to desolder the black wire to remove the light meter while the blue and red wires were connected with screws. Then, the light meter is easily removable. Every time you remove the viewfinder unit, you have to recalibrate the viewfinder focus to match the actual image focus on the film plane. Finally, remove these screws, and both the focusing and the actual shutter unit will be detached from the main body. Now every unit is separated, so it's time to work on individual units. I will be starting from the shutter unit. I removed the ring between the rear lens unit and the focusing helicoid. Typically the only one that needs to be removed to detach the shutter from the focusing section. This is the rear lens unit, which can be removed by hand. I also removed the outer ring, spacer washers, and electrical contact for metering. It's important not to lose any of these parts, so it's best to store them carefully. Now let's remove the parts for the shutter unit. First, you need to cock the shutter. Then, remove the screws holding the escapement mechanism. I detached the spring first, then aligned the locking screw with the slot and pulled the timer lever slightly to clear the way for easy removal. There is a spring hooked into the shutter blade ring that needs to be released as well. Moving on to the backside, I removed some screws and the manual synchro selector ring, then removed other screws to access the shutter blades. The shutter blades are in pairs of large and small blades. This is the aperture blade section. This one used the 5 diaphragm blades for the aperture. The escapement should move as I pulled the arm on the left side. So let's clean all the parts, including the self-timer and other shutter units. It's highly recommended to take photos or record the position of each part to avoid confusion during reassembly. But the good thing about rangefinder cameras is that they mostly use shutters from third-party manufacturers, such as this Copal shutter. There are some variations between Copal shutter models, but mostly we can interchange parts from another Copal shutter. For cleaning tiny parts, I typically use distilled water and multi-purpose cleaning agents for ultrasonic cleaners. Nothing special here. When dealing with rusty shutter blades, I gently rub the blades with the fine 2000 grit sponge sandpaper. I use this cleaning liquid from a local shop. It's very effective for removing oil and finger wax, and it evaporates quickly. The iron rule is no oil or lube for the shutter and aperture blades. I dried the parts that came out from the ultrasonic cleaner. These parts shouldn't be in water for too long. If necessary, remove any remaining water with compressed air. Ensure that no water remains and the parts are completely dry. Then I applied a coat of PTFE dry lube to the parts. PTFE dry lube has a strong smell, so make sure the room is well ventilated. Wipe off any excess lube and allow it to dry. This forms a thin film coating over the surface to prevent oxidation. Now, let's put everything back in its place. The heart is working. The aperture ring is nice and smooth too. This terminal is insulated from the main body, so it doesn't come into contact with any of the parts. The other part is connected to the body. I checked with a multimeter, and everything seems to be okay, I think. Put the rest of the parts together. These snap rings are easy to break, so handle with care. Nice and shiny, the shutter unit is now finished, so let's move on to the focusing section. It's not very difficult to remove this unit, but it's important to keep a record of the distance moved by the helicoid unit at the infinity and closest focus range. The internal parts are different from camera to camera. This model has electrical contact like this to connect with the resistive strip for metering correction. For that, there are some insulation washers between the contact and the screws. This one also used spacer washer rings for focus adjustment. We will see that later on. Later models are easier to adjust infinity focus. Remove the remaining screws from the helicoid and base plate to completely disassemble the parts. Another thing to be noted is that some parts need to be rotated clockwise to be removed. Let's clean the parts. You should always remove old grease before applying new lubrication. I wiped off the old grease on the helicoid and cleaned the old glue on the base plate. I scraped off the old glue and smoothed it with a sanding stick. Then I used a multi-purpose degreaser with a brush to clean the old grease stuck between the helicoid threads. After cleaning, it's time to reassemble all the parts. For the lens grease, I used two types, a thicker, slightly sticky normal friction type and a clear, low friction type. Any high-quality lens grease can be used, as long as it lasts for a few years without drying out. Typically, I screwed in the ring to the end and then rotated it backward a bit to the focusing position. This screw is used to stop the focus ring so that it only operates between the closest and infinity focus. When installing the helicoid, usually it only needs about a half turn to reach the correct position. I installed the other parts into their positions and checked whether the distance moved by the helicoid was within the acceptable range. I reinstalled the shutter release lever and all the electrical connections as before. Check the connections with a multimeter to ensure the insulation for red and blue wires. Everything looks good so far. For the front lens parts, I applied a minimal amount of lube between parts where movement or rotation occurred. Let's assemble these parts. Don't forget about these spacer rings too. These rings are added during focusing adjustment, and the number and thickness of rings can vary even between the same models. I applied some lube where the shutter cocking mechanisms are connected. When reinstalling, the blue wire must be in contact with the notch. Let's put the shutter and focusing unit together. The lens unit will be put in later, as I want to test the shutter speed before installing the lenses. The resistance value should vary according to the shutter or aperture setting. Variation in resistance value affects the light meter reading. And this is how this camera corrects the meter readout according to the shutter or aperture setting. Finally, cock the shutter and check if everything is connected properly. Everything seems fine, and the most challenging part is finished. So let's do some work on the other units. The light meter is working fine, but let's still check the needle. It turns out that the old paint on the needle was peeling off. I carefully removed the old paint with tweezers, cleaned the needle with lacquer thinner, and painted it with yellow lacquer paint. Just painting over the top side with a thin layer of paint is sufficient. There's no need to paint the entire needle. Feel free to choose a different color if you'd like. Nice yellow color, right? Then, I removed the screws to clean the selenium cell and the honeycomb cover. While selenium cells are not as accurate as battery-powered CDS cells, they are the pioneers of light metering. Ultrasonic cleaners are very good at this type of job and put everything back in place. Now the light meter is working perfectly. Let's move on to the next parts. When cleaning the viewfinder, only use warm water or soapy water. Do not use any other cleaning agents, including isopropyl alcohol, as they can damage the coating on the first mirror surface and the viewfinder focus patch. Use only microfiber cloth for cleaning glasses. Small dirt can easily be blown away with the compressed air. Now the viewfinder is nice and clean. It's time to clean the lenses by taking out lens glasses from the barrels. Good lens spanners are essential tools for removing the lens barrels. V-spanners are better than normal spanners because they are more precise and offer better control. Lens suction tools are convenient when removing or installing lens glasses. Be careful not to scratch the glasses when using spanner tools. Simply loosen the rings and rotate them with a plastic or soft wood stick. Most of the time, the glasses can be cleaned with a good fungus cleaning solution and microfiber nibs. Then wipe with a microfiber cloth. Microfiber clothes are cheaper than your wife. This solution cleans the fingerprint and any oily residue on the glasses. Try not to touch the glasses with your bare hand after the cleaning. Now the lens glass is clean and the glasses are in excellent condition. I don't see any water stains or scratches on the surface that are difficult to clean. I cleaned the other lens glasses as well. Use the microfiber nibs if you can easily obtain them. Don't forget to clean the lens barrel and housing before reinstalling the glasses. It's better to assemble the lenses inside a clean room bench for better dust control. But this may be out of scope for most people due to the cost and space requirements. Finally, I put every lens glass back. Now the lenses are nice and clear, which is a very satisfying moment. When I check the body, there are some areas where the oxidation is heavy, mostly the upper part. The paint was starting to chip due to the oxidation. So I removed the gears part of the body as best as I could. Leaving the film taker, which was riveted or bolted, in place. Then I cleaned the area where the paint was peeling off, using a soft steel brush to remove oxidation. I removed old grease and cleaned it with the ultrasonic cleaner. The one I used is the 2K aluminum primer to prevent oxidation and improve paint adhesion on the bare metal surfaces. I wasn't doing a perfect paint job here. I simply wanted to prevent oxidation and achieve a black surface finish. Then painted over the primer with 2K polyurethane black paint and added a thin satin surface finish layer to reduce the glossiness of the base black paint. The paint job turned out pretty well, I think. So let's return the gears to the body. I also put the lube between the gears. This one is connected to the shutter cocking rod, and we'll need to adjust the position later. Let's check whether every gear is working or not. Everything seems to be okay, so let's test with the actual shutter unit. I've encountered a new problem. The shutter doesn't cock when I turn the lever. Therefore, I had to adjust the gear with the slot and recheck it until I found the correct position. This is the proper position. Subsequently, I encountered another issue where the shutter is cocked but doesn't release when pressing the shutter. It turns out that I had placed this part in the wrong direction, so I corrected its position. Now, the shutter and cocking mechanisms are working together again. Let's reassemble everything. We're not done yet. After cleaning and repairing, there are still some adjustments to be made. These can be quite time-consuming. I'm not worried about the shutter speed because rangefinder shutters, like the Copal SVE shutter, come with a predefined shutter speed cam plate, so it won't have as much of an impact on shutter speed as it should. Let's check it anyway. When using a focal plane shutter tester on the leaf shutter, you may notice a slow shutter at higher speeds. A helpful tip is that if you observe a speed around 1/3 slower at 125, 2/3 slower at 1/250, and 1 stop slower at 1/500, then it's good to go. I have another issue with the light meter. The meter needle jumps when I touch the shutter or aperture ring. Upon inspection, I noticed some damage on the resistive strip. I carefully bent the contact so that it can avoid the damaged area. And now the meter needle is stable. To adjust the accuracy of the metering, I had to loosen the screws and turn the ring underneath that holds the resistive strip. You can adjust the metering by comparing the meter readout with a good digital camera or a dedicated light meter such as Sekonic. Multiplex EE testers are better, but they are quite pricey. Now it's time to install the lens units. First, tighten the front lens with rubber tools and the rear lens with a lens spanner carefully. I used a glass plate with some drawn lines to check the infinity focus. Usually, collimators are used for this type of calibration, but they are too expensive. Therefore, I checked the infinity focus by using a known good lens and pointing 2 cameras face to face, both set to infinity focus. However, the focus at infinity was not good, so I had to readjust the focus by removing one of the spacer rings. This model uses spacer rings to adjust the focus, but later models are easier to adjust. The rings have different thicknesses, so you should try with the thinnest ring first. In this particular case, removing the middle one resulted in a reasonably sharp focus. For viewfinder focusing, one screw adjusts the focus image left or right, while another screw adjusts the focus up or down. I used one-sided frosted glass to check the actual image focus projection on the film plane. It's important that your viewfinder focus matches the actual image projection. If not, the image on the film will be out of focus every time, even if your focus on the viewfinder is perfect. Now that everything is calibrated, there are just a few things left to do. Let's start by replacing the light seals on the camera. I used thick black yarn for the light seals instead of the sponge-type foam because the yarn is more convenient. Apply a small amount of glue into the light seal groove and then place the yarn into the groove. Gently push down the yarn so that it sits inside the groove. Trim the edge of the yarn. Light seal foams with pre-applied adhesive are difficult to install, in my opinion. Applying the glue and foam separately give me the better results. I also added light seals on both sides of the camera. I used thick velvet cloth here as a light seal and let the glue dry for a few hours. Before applying the glue for the leatherette, make sure to put the back cover back on. I placed the leatherette on the adhesive paper for a better gluing process. I used Eco White glue for leather, which is water-based and has almost no odor. It's easier to apply than solvent-based glues. Also, apply the glue over the camera body for better adhesion. Don't forget to put the shutter release adjustment cover before placing the leatherette. Place the leatherettes into their position and adjust the position before the glue is completely dried. Ensure that the edges of the leatherette are completely stuck to the surface. Then, remove the excessive glue with a moist cotton swab. I checked the back cover by closing and opening, and everything is working great. Then I reinstalled the rest of the parts. I added the film counterplate, reattached the spring, and tested it to make sure everything was working. I also painted the viewfinder adjustment screws with black lacquer paint to keep them from loosening when the camera is carried around. And don't forget the shutter button. Additionally, I cleaned the covers and fixed the two broken clear covers mentioned at the beginning. Finally, tighten the screw and add the winding knob and the cocking lever. Don't forget to place the bottom plate too. As I installed the cocking lever parts, I noticed a dial with alternating blue, red, and black colors. I'm not sure what its real usage is. If you know, please comment below. One of my favorite parts is repainting the letters. I apply black acrylic paint over the letters and wipe off the excess paint with a flat swab. Then I let the paint dry for a bit and wipe off any remaining excess paint with a moist cloth. It's very satisfying to see the letters appear as new. Everything is working perfectly now. The film counter, the shutter, and the light meter. I inspected everything once again, and I also added the light seals on the back cover because the ones I replaced were a bit shorter. The cover in this place is missing, and the upper body has some dent, but they are not a big deal. It is so good to see this 63-year-old camera is alive again. Restoration on the beautiful Konica SII is now finished and ready to capture the moment of the modern world. Thank you for watching, and hope you get some useful information from my videos. If you don't mind, please like and subscribe to help me restore more of the cameras. See you later.